Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Welcome to today's event hosted by the Warsaw Institute Foundation. Today we will discuss the recent outcomes of European Parliament elections. I am delighted to welcome my today's guests, Professor Tomasz Grosse. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
And Dr. Balázs Tarnok. Good afternoon. Thank you for joining.
Good afternoon. Thank you for having me here.
Thank you very much. Before we start, I will just mention that our event is organized with support of National Institute of Freedom, Center of the Development of Civil Society. Gentlemen, a few days ago, we had a European Parliament elections. The results may have surprised many people and analysts in Europe. I want to start with a general question to you about your thoughts on the actual results and whether we have any clear winners or losers here. It's worth mentioning as well that EPP, ECR gained seats, whereas, for example, Socialists and Democrats, Renew, Greens, and the Left lost a lot of seats these elections. We'll start with Professor Tomasz Grosse. The floor is yours.
First of all, thank you very much for having me on, for invitation to that discussion. As you mentioned, we have clear winners and losers. Beginning with losers, in my opinion, it is Greens, Liberals, which is the Renew group in European Parliament, Socialists and Democrats, another left-wing group, which is losing its members, its deputies. On the other hand, we can call losers President Macron as well as Chancellor Scholz, because on national level they lost a lot of votes to the opposition, which is particularly striking in France, where party of Marine Le Pen, National Rally, collected 2 times more votes than the party of President Macron. So after that defeat, President Macron called snap election. So we have the list of losers, and also we can point some winners. First of all, European People's Party, which is directed by German politicians, central right-wing politicians, CDU, CSU. We can also say that conservatives and reformists won that contest, as well as identity and democracy, which are 2 so-called Eurosceptic, but rather we should name conservative forces in the European Parliament. And finally, we can also add that mainstream in the European Parliament also won, because we can predict that the same parties, the same mainstream central left-wing parties will establish the coalition which will rule the parliament in next term. So again, as usually, mainstream liberal and left-wing parties, the same like in previous parliaments, gain the power in the European Parliament. So instead of poorer results on liberals and socialists and Democrats, again, they could create some ruling coalition, ruling majority, which could impact selection of important position in the EU as well as legislative.
Thank you very much. Well, definitely EPP secured its position as the biggest power in European Parliament, whereas, as you mentioned, this national turn, far-oriented turn in European politics is interested as well. Now let's move with the same question to Mr. Balázs Tarnok. What are your thoughts on the results? Do we have winners and losers?
Thank you for having me here once again. It's an honor to join your discussion here. I totally agree with Professor Grosse that with identifying the winners and the losers, it seems that it's quite obvious who are the obvious winners and the losers of this European election, which does not happen always. That even after a few minutes publishing the official results, it seems that there are obvious winners. Of course, the European People's Party is the winner of the elections general. They gained at least 10 more seats than they had in the previous term. And I'm saying at least 10 because it's quite high, the number of those MEPs, which are members of parties that have never been ever in the European Parliament before, and they now are gonna seek party coalitions to join in the European Parliament. So now we cannot really estimate how many members of the EPP will have, but it's definitely gonna be quite a lot more than they had in the previous one. If we want to make some other identify winners in terms of European political parties, as Professor said, the ECR and the ID are obviously winners of these elections. They also will have more MEPs in the next cycle. And if you want to more specify more, clear winner of the election is Marine Le Pen. Marine Le Pen's party, the National Rally, and Giorgia Meloni and her party, the Fratelli d'Italia. Marine Le Pen's party will have 30 MEPs in the next cycle in the European Parliament, while Meloni will have 24 members instead of the 10 what her party had earlier. So these are quite an accomplishment. And in terms of losers, of course, the Greens, the Renew group are significant losers of this election. The Renew lost 23 seats, while the Greens lost 18 seats compared to the previous cycle. The SD did not lose that much, but they are having less in the next cycle. And of course, Emmanuel Macron and Olaf Scholz are clear losers of this, with upcoming internal problems in France and probably in Germany. And as the professor said, the mainstream coalition will have the majority in the European Parliament. They're gonna have somewhat 400 seats for the required 361 majority. So they are in a safe majority. If we imagine 5 years ago, Ursula von der Leyen was elected only with 9 votes extra, so she had a very tiny majority in the European Parliament. It seems that the coalition will have more, and this empowers the chances of Ursula von der Leyen getting into office for the second time. On the other hand, it seems that the opposition, the relevant opposition, is going to change. In the previous cycle, it was the Greens which determined the mood, the political environment in the European Parliament. They were the most relevant opposition party, and that's how they tried to influence the majority. And in line with specific issues. They voted even together on climate and green matters. And in the new cycle, the relevant opposition is going to be on the right. The ECR, the ID, they have significant differences. And of course, the alternative for Germany, the AFD, may establish a new political party. They are, as far as I know, they are discussing it right now. So these three blocks have very different views with a few similarities, which means that there is basically no chance that they are gonna cooperate very closely, but they can cooperate on an ad hoc basis. And generally, what I expect that the ECR, with the leading of Giorgia Meloni, will be the most powerful opposition party in the European Parliament, and she will have the ability to influence the majority, and primarily, of course, the European People's Party, which do have also right-wing members too. So they will try to push the European People's Party as much as they can, and accordingly, identity issues, ideological issues linked to the conservative idea might be portrayed in a much visible way in the next European parliamentary cycle.
Thank you very much. You started with an interesting insight that EPP may gain even more seats than those estimated straight after the elections due to influx of new MPs. But on the other hand, maybe due to bigger support for right-wing parties, we may expect more seats for ECR as well. That's what will happen in the following weeks. We'll see how it goes. And we just spoke about the division of powers in the newly elected European Parliament. So now I want to ask you about EU policies. So having in mind how the power will look like in the following term, remembering the bigger support for right-wing parties, I want to ask you if we should expect any shifts regarding major EU policies, such as enlargement policy, climate policy, or migration policy. And once again, I will give the floor to Mr. Balázs Tarnok here.
So, given the fact what I earlier said, that there's going to be a relevant opposition much rather on the right, I expect some shifts in terms of these policies. In the previous cycle, climate and green issues were highly pushed by the Greens, which are now pretty much weakened. And therefore, I would expect some kind of regression in this sense, in the meaning that they will not have, of course, within the coalition agreement, the Renew and the SND might push these issues too with the members of the EPP, but there's going to be much less force coming from the opposition to improve climate policy. On the other hand, as we see the results, several anti-migration parties won actually elections on a member state level in the European Union. Like these far right or radical right parties which strictly oppose migration. ECR is going to be stronger. ID will be probably with Le Pen stronger too. So we could anticipate some kind of strict migration policy, in the sense that there, of course, we have to acknowledge that the European Parliament is the sphere where political views are echoed very harshly in a political manner. In the Council of the EU is much different. They are much more pure national interests. When listening to an European Parliament debate, they are echoing the voice of their citizens. And as we see this year's European Parliament elections, there is a much stronger mandate for opposing further liberalization of the EU's migration policy. We do not want to forget about the fact that the European Parliament just in April passed the new Pact on Migration and Asylum, which will enter into force in 2026. So in the coming 2 years, there is less room for influencing migration policy in its merits. But what we can expect is much more voice of anti-immigration, anti-migration policies on behalf of these newly strengthened European parties and members. Enlargement is might be a different story. In terms of enlargement, I see the force of national interests much powerful, in the sense that in the Council of the EU, several EU member states have opposed further enlargement of the EU on the basis of their national interess, and was not that much portrayed the matter of enlargement as it was migration or climate issues in the European Parliament. I don't think these national interests have changed significantly, and enlargement was not a crucial element of the campaign in this year's elections as it was the migration or the climate policy. So I would expect less attention compared to climate and migration issues in the European Parliament on enlargement. However, it's going to be one of the most important issues of the upcoming cycle because of Ukraine's and Moldova's accession desire. And of course, we do not want to forget about the Western Balkan countries waiting now several decades in some instances for EU accession. But on the other hand, if you want to move forward with enlargement, further enlarge the European Union, you may want to consider the reform of the treaties, institutional reform, as it was in 2004 with the Eastern enlargement bomb, when, of course, member states knew that if such a big number of Central European countries are coming to uphold the efficiency, the functioning of the European Union, they have to make an institutional reform. And often when we talk about further enlargement, it comes together with the amendment of the treaties to make to keep the European Union functioning. So it's going to be linked to the future of Europe. As we know it, the upcoming Hungarian EU presidency is going to push this issue. It's probably going to be a priority for the Budapest government to promote the Western Balkan enlargement. But I expect that in the coming years, it's going to be a very important issue, not necessarily in the European Parliament.
Thank you very much. You are right. Looking at increase of national powers, they will have a stronger mandate of opposing the migration changes, as well as climate policies. On the other hand, Greens losing, as for now, 19 seats forces them to have a worse mandate in support of climate policy changes. Before we move to Professor Tomasz Grosse, I highly encourage our viewers to address some questions in the chat to our experts. And Professor Grosse, same question to you. regarding potential shift if in EU major policies after the election results?
In general, I don't expect any serious change, rather continuation of the previous policies, both in the European Parliament as well as in the Council. In general, we would have some slight tactical turn to the right positions, more conservative positions, but basically very limited in those three policies. The same is in the Council, without serious changes in that institution. I mean, new right-wing governments across the EU. We shouldn't expect any serious change in the Council of its position, for instance, towards migration or climate policy. So basically, it would be the same policy like today, and the same would be in the European Parliament. Maybe rhetorically, bigger representation of conservative groupings could oppose some left-wing ideas promoted by European Parliament. But basically, it would be the same policy. And also very important is the, for instance, who would be the next president of the European Commission, because the legislative initiative is on the side of Commission. So if it would be von der Leyen, we would have the same policy in general. Another president of European Commission would be some question mark, but because of support from the same governments and from the same mainstream parties in the European Parliament, still I predict continuation rather change.
Thank you very much. So slight but limited changes, if changes, but in general continuity of business as usual from European Union here. Gentlemen, in your responses to first question, both of you mentioned the success of Marine's Le Pen National Rally Party in France, together with Emmanuel Macron's centrist alliance lost. And of course, straight after the results, Emmanuel Macron, the president of France, dissolved the parliament and announced a new election. I want you to share your opinion with our viewers whether such way, looking at European Union states, such way of acting should be also adopted by other heads of states, so that we are losing European elections, then we are checking with national elections the preferences of voters and citizens. And we are staying with Professor Tomasz Grosse.
It is a particular situation in France. Without any serious repetition in other member states after that elections. So still President Macron is ahead of state and responsible for foreign and defense policy, as well as nominating government. So his policy might be constrained a little bit by opposing government, because I predict that new government would be established by opposition parties towards President Macron. So we should expect difficult cohabitation between opposition and president, but still president is responsible for European policy and for foreign and defense policy of France. In that way, it is maybe to some extent activism of President Macron would be curbed, but I don't expect he will change his contemporary policy. For instance, in defense, in promoting innovation towards Ukraine as well. So it is very limited change or limited impact of that governmental or parliamentary French election on European Union. Even if it is a France highly important Western European member states, important for European Union. So in fact, of course, it might be a real change if we have any change function of president of France. It would be real change for Europe. So if Marine Le Pen achieved this position successfully, it would be real game changer. The same would be if at least few governments in Western as well as Central Europe could change government for conservative ones, because the constellation of council could change in that conservative way that could produce conservative shift in particular policies like migration or climate policy. But without such changes on the member state level, I cannot see any real change, at least for now.
Thank you very much. We need to bear in mind that in France we have parliamentary presidential system, which is slightly different from what we have in most CE countries. And now let's move with the same question to Mr. Balázs Tarnok about situation in France and potentially similar situation in other countries of the EU.
Thank you. I completely agree with Professor Gross, so I would not really like to add much to that. I think it was complete. I would like to highlight two interesting aspects. On the one hand, the European parliamentary elections are often seen as an interim referendums regarding the governing parties. So this is the election where the constituents can send messages to the governing parties if they are not satisfied, because frankly European parliamentary election does not really change much in that specific member states. And as we know it, European parliamentary elections are now basically 27 separate member state elections. So the constituents, but the politicians too, focus on member states' issues and in several instances internal political matters affect how do they vote. So primarily they not necessarily expressing their views on pan-European issues, but much rather reflecting on national matters. And the other thing is that it's very interesting how the right-wing, radical right and far right got stronger in the old member states, let's see, France, where Marine Le Pen won with this huge majority, or Germany, where the AfD is now, this, according to the European parliamentary elections, the second strongest party, gaining double seats as it had in the previous cycle, or Italy, where Giorgia Meloni had a pretty big majority with his right-wing policy, and there we have the Netherlands, Belgium, and even Austria. So it's very interesting how in the Western European countries these radical right and far right parties have emerged. And I think this should not be disregarded and will not be disregarded. Because it's a very interesting phenomenon, and consequently, this may bring the bigger relevance, if I may put like that, Central Eastern European countries within, for instance, the EPP and other bigger parties. So this may raise some attention in a positive way to Central Europe, while the old member states in the West are struggling with the upcoming empowerment of the far right.
Thank you very much for sharing your view on that matter. Gentlemen, last question for today, more specific about your countries and situation in your countries. We'll start with Professor Gross. How would you assess the outcome of European Parliament election in Poland? We had the competition between two biggest parties. They almost went head to head with the results, but the surprise is that the third biggest result is gained by the national party Konfederacja. So what are your thoughts on the situation in Poland?
I agree with your opinion. We have basically two strong blocs, right-wing and liberal left-wing bloc, which are the most important in political landscape in Poland. And we observe during the latest European election that the right-wing camp is getting stronger, and the liberal left-wing one is weakening. So the sign of significance of right-wing bloc to be stronger is rising position of confederation. And the signature of the significance of or sign of liberal leftist bloc to be a little bit weaker is losing position of so-called third way and the left. So we have two strong parties in each bloc, Civic Platform on the left side and Law and Justice on the right side. But the minor coalitions or minor parties which could establish that bloc has even more importance, at least in terms of domestic politics. But the difference is that on the liberal left bloc, we have clear established coalition, which is of course strongly divided after that election, because obvious differences among coalitions were strongly visible during campaign and after the result to European Parliament. But on the right wing bloc, in fact, we have Anne Block. So it is cohesive voters with strong, even more radical Eurosceptic views about the EU, but without formal coalition, without formal political discussion among political elites to establish formal collaboration. Without such a collaboration on the right-wing side, any chances for regaining to power by Polish right is, of course, impossible. So it is the most important difference. We have gaining ground for right-wing bloc, but without formal coalition or discussion among political elites in that camp.
Thank you very much. So strong support for right-wing parties, but without formal coalition, and the poor result of the left. Now moving to the end and to Mr. Balázs Tarnok. Situation in Hungary. Fidesz getting worse result than in past elections, whereas Mr. Magyar's oppositional movement getting pretty solid result in those elections. Could you tell us more about the situation in Hungary?
Yep. So Hungary has 21 seats in the European Parliament. Out of these 21 seats, now goes 11 to the governing parties, to Fidesz, 7 seats to this new formation of Peter Magyar, the TISA party, 2 seats to the leftist parties, and 1 seat to the far right party, Our Homeland Hungary. Fidesz is now communicating that they have never received this much vote before nominally. On the other hand, this is their worst result in terms of percentages. They received 44% of the votes in total. In the previous cycle, they had 13 MEPs. Now they will only have 11, so they lost 2 seats in the European Parliament. And what is the most interesting phenomenon is this new TISA party, Peter Magyar's party. He founded his party couple weeks ago, so it's a brand new formation, and they received 30% of the votes. What is also interesting is that the TISA party is quite significant outside Budapest, which was not the case with the leftist opposition parties. Of course, the Fidesz is claiming that Peter Magyar's party is a left-wing party. In fact, this is much more biased than the picture, and they try to not to commit themselves to any ideologies. What they claim is that they have enough of the Fidesz and they have enough of the earlier existing opposition, and they want to have a third way there, something new, something different, and a significant number of Hungarian voters have chosen this party, which is now heading to the EPP. Just to remind the audience, Fidesz left the EPP in 2021, if I remember correctly, and in the past couple of years they were non-affiliated members of the European Parliament, not attached to any party coalition. So TISA party is a significant winner of the Hungarian election, but of course Fidesz is also a winner of this coalition because they have more than the half of the Hungarian seats in the European Parliament. And besides that, there are several losers. The loser is generally the left, which they had 5 seats, the Democratic Coalition and the Hungarian Socialist Party in the European Parliament. now they will have only 2 seats, and of course the Liberals are clear losers. They had 2 seats in the European Parliament, and now they are gone. So what are we having in Hungary now is a totally new situation, new internal political situation. In the past 40 years, mostly it was much rather international politics coming into the internal political arena. There was no significant internal politics because there were no relevant opposition forces, and now we have this new party which is kind of a mixture. We do not really know much about them, and this was their strategy, not to unfold any belongingness to ideologies, but as we see their public events, protests on the streets, the signs, the symbolism they are using, they are much rather seen by independent experts as moderate right, center right party heading to the EPP. So the right wing with the Fidesz is keeping mostly their positions, even though they had 10% less of the votes as they had in 2019. So instead of 53%. Now they had 44%, but they are still keeping their forces. The moderate right is there, and the left and the rebels are gone from the internal political arena.
Thank you. So similar to Poland, the loss on the side of the left, but emerging big political player, TISA. Definitely, other parties have to bear this movement in mind. Gentlemen, with that question, we've came to an end of our discussion. Thank you for drawing up the situation in Poland and Hungary to our viewers, and thank you very much for participating in today's discussion. I also want to take this opportunity to thank our viewers and encourage everyone to follow our next events. Next week we will be talking about the results of election in India. So thank you very much once again, and I wish you a calm afternoon today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very
Goodbye.
much.